to briefly prep some of the stuff that we're going to do about karma and rebirth with the group this week, or just for general use. Karma and rebirth, there are a number of things we might say about it. Karma in Sanskrit, or karma in Pali, spelled slightly differently the way it's rendered, literally action, is actually, for most of us, and the way it's used, it's a way of understanding consequences of action. But often that consequence is better understood as relating to the cetana, the volition behind the action. So it's the intent to do something benign, something good and noble that leads to good karmic consequences, or it's the intention to do harm, the bad thoughts. And it's the thoughts themselves that are most commonly connected with a karmic view of things. Yes, it is rather similar to what we find in many forms of Hinduism, to an extent Jainism, and you might argue it develops from the Hindus' ideas, which are initially, perhaps in their most ancient form, about ritual actions that become developed into ideas about reincarnation. And as I've no doubt said to some of you in class, Buddhists, when they're in the mood to be fussy, or some forms of Buddhism, prefer the term rebirth. It says here, see anatta, it's because of Buddhist teachings about not self, and there not being a thing to repeatedly incarnate, that people often tend to opt for the term rebirth instead. But they do believe we have past and future lives, and that these lives are related to the quality of our actions. How you can believe in not self, anatta, but still the process of rebirth and many lives, we'll come to see perhaps another time. The process of rebirth doesn't necessarily have a creation and a culmination. It's seen as going back countlessly and going forward potentially indefinitely. Say a bit more about karma and rebirth in the traditional Buddhist account, the Theravada Buddhist account at least. Rebirth can occur within a variety of realms, we'll see some in a minute: human, animal, pretas, ghosts, various sorts; hell, heavenly. Sometimes there are 6 realms: gods and asuras, these kind of titans, is that the right word? Like heavenly gods, and then godettes, mini-gods. Titans is probably a better word. But the important thing for many to remember when studying Buddhism is that none of these destinations is seen as permanent, or notably, even including, say, going to becoming heavenly, as the ultimate answer to your problems in life. Buddhism, in its early form and in many forms that it comes to have, envisions a vast, complex, occupied cosmos. There are all kinds of realms and beings. But, notably, these are all caught in the same process. They're all imperfect. Their lives are still all marked by aging, sickness and death, and the lifespans of some may be huge and others short. But none of them is a final answer. They're all subject to suffering, to imperfection in various ways. There are various places you can go and look. Actually, somebody seems to have put on the Wikipedia page for this, in karma, the whole chunk from Peter Harvey's Introduction to Buddhism book. Interesting. Unless they've changed it to something else, of course. But it was most commonly, it was that, till when I looked at it recently. And that's the book we've been using in class. So there are various different beings. Those stuck in hell, animals, ghosts, sometimes sharing their space with humans. Whether they're proper rebirths, or whether people who got kind of stuck due to their huge attachment and not being properly reborn properly, is a matter we might explore. Human beings, one of the few realms of rebirth in which attaining nirvana is possible, for many Buddhists, that's us. Asuras, or lowly deities, demons, titans, anti-gods, they're described. Not, say, by some Theravada traditions, seen as kind of separate realm. And then the devas, the brahmas, the gods, the deities, a realm of these powerful heavenly beings. So, but Buddhism, interesting, doesn't at least initially seem to deny the Hindu gods, but rather radically alter their status and in some ways lower it. And they're there, but they're not the ultimate answer to anything. Some later secular, more secularized Buddhists, and you'll find this is very strong in North America at the moment, tend to see all of this talk as largely figurative, metaphorical. Many of them don't believe literally in some of this, but in many Buddhist countries, it's been a core aspect of traditional Buddhist teaching to see this populated cosmos around us in this kind of fuller world. Some final notes about karma. The whole process of karma and rebirth is often referred to by this term samsara, the process of wandering on. We don't necessarily have to blame everything on karma, in that new karma, my actions, are not entirely caused by my past actions, because that would be fatalistic. You might put it this way: the situation in which I find myself, maybe due to my past karma, I may find myself in Gloucester on a rainy day in a hurricane, deciding what to do in a situation where something bad's happened. But whether I choose to run and help people or run away and save myself, whatever it might be, that's up to me. That there needs to be, given the operation of karma rebirth, some room for free will. Karma itself is seen as playing out rather organically in some sense in Buddhism. That is, not all the consequences occur at death. They happen during this life, at death, and during future lives. And those consequences can be positive or negative, but ultimate liberation, enlightenment, nirvana, cannot be achieved merely through just getting good karma. It's like a ladder, or like a Premier League. When you get to the top, you win. You get enough points, you win. That's not quite the same thing. As I said previously, and will no doubt say again, it's often the intentions. A quote there from the Sutta, which says, "Chetana, monks, is karma," I say. Having willed one act through body, speech and mind. So it's intention that's so important. And as I said, we might explore on another occasion whether questions arise because of the lack of belief in a permanent self in Buddhist thought about what exactly is reborn. But before that, I want to think about karma more in, I guess, the context of an ethical. Okay, we're going to be studying, amongst other things, in week 3 for our undergraduate module, karma and rebirth. And I want to have a look at it. And yes, Buddhists often traditionally believe that a key aspect of the study of karma is how it affects rebirth. But I want to focus on that being true, but remember that it's also at the core for those kind of Buddhists, and also later Buddhists are more skeptical about the literalness of rebirth, more about ethics, really. So I've chosen to have a quick look at a sutta, the Ambalatika Rahulovada Sutta, the instructions, the way given to Rahula, the Buddha's son, at the Mango Stone, which is the first bit of the title. And as so often with the things we've been studying for this module, or studying Buddhism generally, I've been using Access to Insight for its very wide-ranging selection. And here it is, and you can see it's part of the Majjhima Nikaya. Also, I notice on Access to Insight it's available as an audio reading. So if you want to, you can hear, as it says, hear this sutta read aloud at suttareadings.net. So that's rather nice touch. It starts as suttas tend to start, as we've discovered in our study. Thus have I heard, or I've heard, or thus was heard by me. That on occasion the Blessed One was staying near Rajagaha at the bamboo grove, the squirrels' feeding ground. Blah blah blah. At that time Venerable Rahula was staying at the Mango Stone, and the Blessed One, arising from his seclusion in the late afternoon after a nap, went to where Venerable Rahula was staying, at the Mango Stone. Venerable Rahula saw him coming from afar, and on seeing him, set out a seat and water for washing the feet. The Blessed One sat down on the seat and sat down on the seat set out, and having sat down, washed his feet. Venerable Rahula, bowing down to the Blessed One, sat down to one side. And there's a chat about things, and you can read that about why lying is not really okay. The bit I wanted to try and focus on was to do here with, well, this leads into about deliberate lies and how you should feel shameful, but importantly, ends this bit on lies. So, Rahula, you should train yourself. I will not tell a deliberate lie, even in jest. Then he goes on, after talking about lies initially, and says, what do you think, Rahula? What is a mirror for? For reflection, sir. I like it when sons call their fathers sir. It doesn't happen in my house. In the same way, Rahula, bodily actions, verbal actions, and mental actions are to be done with repeated reflection. And I guess this is a theme that comes out of Buddhist thinking in general about ethics, and links in with the focus on meditation. You could try and make a connection with the popularity at the present of mindfulness, the idea that we do things in such a rush we don't think about them till afterwards, and that leads us to a kind of anxiety or problem. Anyway, before we act, we need to reflect. But you can see three kinds of reflection there, three kinds of action even. Bodily actions, verbal actions, mental actions. So ultimately they all arise from some kind of mental thought in the first place, an impulse, and it's those impulses that are thought to be connected most intimately with how karma is understood in Buddhism. But this paragraph here, whenever you want to do a bodily action, you should reflect on it. This bodily action I want to do, would it lead to self-affliction, pain to me, to the affliction of others, or to both? Would it be an unskillful bodily action with painful consequences, painful results? If, on reflection, you know that it would lead to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both, it would be an unskillful bodily action with painful consequences, painful results. Then any bodily action of that sort is absolutely unfit for you to do. But if on reflection you know that it would not cause affliction, etc., it would be a skillful bodily action with pleasant consequences, pleasant results, then any bodily action of that sort is fit for you to do. And then goes on through various reformulations of these things, as these texts tend to do. The interesting things I think in the passage there is, yes, it might lead to painful consequences in terms of rebirth, but also painful consequences. Does it hurt people? Will I hurt myself? Will I bring myself misery? Is it kind of anger? Is it going to be violent? Will it cause pain? For me, for others in general. Does this lead to kind of an increase in worldly suffering? And I think not in a relatively crass, a kind of crass utilitarian way, but in a general sense, does this lead to an increase in suffering? Is this kind of dangerous, bad, malicious? And this is kind of verbal actions, mental actions. And then note the phrase, well, if that's the case, it would be unskillful. And I know there are those that are uncomfortable with the translation of kusala as skillful and akusala as unskillful, preferring just good and bad, and we might talk about that in class. But I quite like the idea of things which are ethical as being skillful, learning to act properly and to avoid improper action that causes suffering is part of a skillful way of living, a well-crafted life. So I think there's something in thinking about karma. Yes, there's all the stuff about rebirth and the realms of rebirth and things, but at a more subtle level, I think, this idea, how do I put together a life, a way of thinking, a way of speaking and a way of acting that doesn't cause suffering to others, doesn't cause suffering to me in the short term, the medium term and the long term. That is good, but also it requires a level of reflection, not just about individual acts, but in general. How do I put together a skillful life? What does a skillful life look like? And the text tends to go on to basically take the point that's been made there and reiterate it about verbal actions and mental actions, and goes into summarise. It says, Rahula, all those Brahmins and contemplatives in the course of the past who purified their bodily actions, verbal actions and mental actions did it through repeated reflection on their bodily actions, verbal actions and mental actions in just this way. And goes on with repetitions of various sorts. And ends, thus, Rahula, you should train yourself. I will purify my bodily actions through repeated reflection. I will purify my verbal actions through repeated reflection. I will purify my mental actions through repeated reflection. That's how you should train yourself. This is what the Blessed One said, gratified, Venerable Rahula, delighted in the Blessed One's words. And who wouldn't? According to the notes you see, Rahula, the Buddha's son, was 7 years old when this discourse was delivered to him. Quite impressive maturity, I guess, but he got the Buddha for a dad. I guess that kind of helps. But the idea that's at the end there, the last thing I want to say, is this idea of ethics as training is really powerful. It partly evokes for me that kind of Aristotelian or virtue ethics way of thinking about ethics, that ethics isn't about doing this action well or that action well. It's about putting together a whole range of things to be a good person. It's the idea that if I want to be a good person, if I want to purify my actions, if I want to kind of change my life radically for the better, in the way that some might argue Buddhism proposes, I need to train for it. I need to reflect. Living a skillful life is a matter of practice. It's a matter of kind of working hard at it again and again and again. And I think that, aside from all our reflections on kind of very colourful realms of rebirth and things, there's something in that about reflection, practice and training that really seems to get at least a fair bit of what Buddhism has to say about ethics.